Welcome to The Quo, a community of challengers, disruptors, and changemakers. I'm your host, Payal Patel. Join me as I dive into stories at the intersection of gender, race, and social and economic issues. This podcast series spotlights individuals from various industries, disciplines, and walks of life who are challenging the status quo. Through interesting and thought-provoking conversations, The Quo aims to elevate the voices and stories of endeavoring change agents in hopes of empowering communities and inspiring meaningful change within our society through education, advocacy, and the power of storytelling. Are you ready? Let's get it. Welcome back, cohort. I'm so excited to continue this journey. It's the second episode with a guest, and I think I'm going to dive right into this one because this person is so special to me. There she is, Antonia. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Before we get underway, I do want to just give our listeners and viewers a brief background on you. So you're an entrepreneur and powerful change agent, founder of On a Personal Note, and I'm not going to go into what that is because I think it's going to be best heard from you. You're the newest addition to the UN Women Chicago Board of Directors. I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited about this because I am on the board of directors as well, and I had actually recruited you, and I'm so excited that you're joining, and you'll be joining as the director of engagement. So cannot wait to see what you do with that. So Antonia also serves as on the boards of other organizations that share similar missions of advancing economic and education-based policies that impact women and BIPOC communities. And she's also an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not just by words, my friends. She actually lives and breathes it. She does it by action. And I can't wait to dive into that specifically. So warm welcome, my friend. Welcome, Tony. And we call her Tony for short. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. First of all, being able to see the full opener backstage. Yes, there's a virtual backstage. This is an amazing setup. This is a legit podcast. This isn't just somebody's, house garage. It is in a rock star garage, but it is, that's not, it is a beautiful, amazing venue and recording space. But yes, I'm so proud.
over you for a second. I just wanted to say shout out to Rockstar's Garage. Definitely look out.
Yes. So kudos, because I had the privilege of getting to see that was a 9-hour day of being able to kind of create this. And so I had seen that raw part and I was like, yes, sprinkle the confetti on me. Yes, let's walk down the stairs together.
Yes. So to our listeners and viewers, she has been here with me from the very start. She was part of the test process for this podcast. And so it is really a full circle moment. And for you to be a part of this and be my second guest on here, it just means so much to me. So I actually do want to give the backstory of how we know each other. We want to give a shout out to Northwestern University's MSc program. We both got our master's. Yes, the Wildcats. Master of Science in Communication from Northwestern University. Now, interesting fact is that we did not do the program together, but that program brought us together in a different way. So I believe we found each other outside of it, but as alums, and then bonded at the Publicity Club of Chicago luncheon. And from that moment on, it's been a whirlwind of a friendship, wouldn't you say?
I would, because it's interesting as I discover something new about you every time we talk. I am at the same time, I'm inspired. And I think there's this element of safety that you provide, because I had randomly decided to go to that Publicity Club of Chicago. And it was at that particular meeting that you were sitting 3 tables away, and they were wanting to highlight and honor you. And I just knew I had to wait till the end to go over and make a beeline to you. And then I was like, okay, so I don't know, but I just believe in synchronicity and I can't believe that you're here. And it was just amazing. And then we've been living parallel lives in different bodies and skin and countries and all of that. And like our stories overlap. And it's just, there's this just amazing feeling of camaraderie that is just so deep, like as a human, as a woman of color, as a communication professional, like there's just so many layers. And so I'm even excited to see where like our friendship grows 30 years from now.
Yeah, we're just getting started. And I do believe that there was so much alignment with us. And I know you like to say synchronicity. So there has been so much along the way since the moment we met up until this point, even what you're doing with your endeavors. So I think that's a great place to start. That is my first question. I want to talk about on a personal note, which is your baby, right? We've been talking about this. We've even had co-working sessions around both the quo and on a personal note. And there's a lot of synergy there as well. But why don't you tell everyone what on a personal note is and what your process has been from a creative standpoint in getting that launched?
Absolutely. So On a Personal Note is the showcase of this menagerie of incredible human beings like Pael, like the guests that she interviews, and the people in our networks. And so I looked around and discovered like, this is not something that I need to take for granted. It was in the middle of COVID. I was laying on my back on my right side only because I had a bad case of vertigo for the first time I'd ever had an ear infection, and it was in my 30s. So I really did think I was gonna die. I thought I was on my deathbed. And so everything that I had thought about, I'm like, if I were to make a company and like looking around the network of amplifying and connecting this menagerie of people, places, and things that I've serendipitously come across. And I was kind of teasing out those two words, synchronicity, because I do use that a lot, and serendipity. And what I loved about, as much of a science geek that I am, what I loved about serendipity is that it's almost a neutral word. Synchronicity feels very scientific and precise, whereas serendipity is approachable, whether you call it magic, a blessing, coincidence, whatever you call it. Everyone can kind of relate to that moment of like, man, if I didn't go to that event, that particular event on that particular day, I would not have been able to connect with Pael. And just basking in that present moment. And so with what I decided as I was like working to build it out is that On a Personal Note is also going to be me infusing how I live my life, and that there's this authentic wisdom, beauty, love, balance, wholeness that I really worked hard to get to in my own life. But I also looked around that network, and you all are doing the same thing. And it's like, I've got to share this with everyone. I've got to amplify and connect everyone so that they can be able to pick and choose their role models. There might be a piece that they can pull from Pael and a piece that they can pull from other guests, or even just experiences of stationery, or hey, this is how I use this is what my phone back looks like. I can share with you, it brings me joy, and I can share with you where to get it. So just being able to kind of utilize this digital media space as like a breath of fresh air, a place that is just your own place to tap into inspiration.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You said so much there that is just so spot on. Like it definitely connects with me. And I do use that word intentionally because you are a connector, my friend. I believe that you've even said it on many occasions, but you've also demonstrated it in everything that you do. So one, I want to talk to you about what connectivity looks like in your world. And then two, how does that translate into the content you're going to put out through On a Personal Note?
Absolutely. Oh, that's such a great question. And again, we're shouting out Northwestern MSc program, because I would not have learned really what I was within a network going back to this, scientific look as me as this organism. And so it was for my semester, it was my last course, and it was called Leveraging Your Networks. And it was taught by Professor Nashir Contractor, who goes by Nosh. And like, he was the person that like, it was determining who was going to go up in the NASA space station to be able to create enough tension in the group that they get work done, but not enough that it, completely dissipates and there's fighting happening upstairs. Oh my God, up in space. And
upstairs.
Upstairs. Yeah. And so there was just a lot during that course where we were teasing out like, okay, let's look at your friends. Let's look at your network. Let's look at like, where does this plot? And I realized that I was a connector, and I was faced with, okay, but I have all of these connections and I'm this spoke in the wheel. And yet for me to actually be my best at it, I should be able to start actually connecting them better so that I'm more effective. And to think about how important connectors are, where we can be rather nomadic and transient. And yet, if we come across a piece of information, a person at that time, and we know something else, we can immediately connect the dots and be able to at least present that opportunity to that person. Now, what they do with it is up to them. And right. So I guess to answer your question, it's how I realized and discovered that I was a connector. I will also make mention that like, I graduated in 2018. So for me to really integrate, because it was to learn that, it was very vulnerable and it was hard. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And like, and what does this actually look like? And that's also where I learned about personal board of directors. And so it was like a 2-year process to kind of like start fitting what I had learned and integrating it into my life in a usable way. And sometimes that was terrifying and scary and hard and painful. And then at other times you would have just these quick moments and it's like, okay, now I know what to do next time. And it's great. So now here I am, and I am able to do this now for UN Women Chicago on a global international scale. And, I'm in my head knowing that I'm going to be working with other incredible women who are going to have their different pieces. You as marketing, and others as public affairs, and others as events. Like, it's just it's like, okay, I'm holding back the floodgates, and I'm and it's like, we're going to listen, we're going to take it all in, and then be able to pull what it needs to pull when we start brainstorming and thinking about things. So yeah. I think a lot of metaphors, but I would definitely think that spoke aspect now has turned into a spider web for me. So if I'm in the center, now I'm starting to connect each of those different lines, each of those different spokes on various levels.
Yeah. I love that because it just demonstrates how interconnected we all are and interdependent in our beingness. The UN Women opportunity, I recruited you. Had we not bonded through the MSc experience at Northwestern, despite being in the program during different times, it's like all these pieces had to happen, and all that connectivity had to happen for us to arrive in this moment. And so yes. I'm with you on that. Like, I firmly believe that people are put on your path for a purpose. There's purpose behind all of this, which brings me to my next question. I want to talk about purpose a little bit. So what is the why behind what you do? Because you're doing something really special and unique here with On a Personal Note, but just every time I talk to you, I feel like you're a very purpose-driven person. You are setting intentions out there into the universe, and you're being very mindful about your actions and your words. And so what led you to that point? What is your why as to why you do what you do?
I can say doing inner leadership courses, even just in the last 6 weeks, that my purpose is to be a connector. That is my life's mission. And the reason for where the connection comes in is that it not only am I able to connect, but I'm able to then amplify and elevate what other people are doing. And when I reflected 6 weeks ago, again, it's something I actually have been doing since I was a little kid. There's lore of how, I grew up in a multi-generational family. It was basically, it was like Littlefoot. So it was like my mom and then my grandparents. And so Littlefoot, Land Before Time, I dated myself, but what that also enabled me to do is I have this multi-generational experience. I got to have references from my mom's generation, references from my grandparents' generations. I'm around all of these older people who were so comfortable with just my presence. And so I might ask them, well, why is it that you go to work every day in that corporate office? And in a way, as a 3-year-old, that was not only probably jarring to hear kind of these kind of things, because I was also a kid who grew up really fast. And so I wouldn't say that I was precocious as much as I was just very inquisitive, and I was very linguistic. And I would ask them, really deep questions, and then I would report on it. Like I would say, this is what Mr. Jones is doing, and the only reason that he goes in every day is he's trying to actually kind of figure that out. He really actually enjoys fishing. That's his favorite time, and like now it's one of those things where it's like I'm able to do that really easily. And what's also been fascinating is that the power that I've held within my networks, when I do share something with them that would be relevant, I can't count how many times they'll come back and hold up a picture and be like, you remember that artist you told me about? I bought it. Or do you remember that event you told me about? I went. Or do you remember that course you told me about? I took it. And so starting to realize I'm providing these pieces of the puzzle in these moments of connection as well. So it's not always necessarily like connecting them with another person or another organization. Maybe it's connecting them with a resource or a tool that's going to help them on their journey. And that just fills me with so much energy and exhilaration. And so when I am exhausted and tired and I don't want to, it's like, I have no idea who I'll meet today or what I'll discover today. And that just becomes more fuel.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I definitely tell in the work that you do how that translates over. And I think earlier, so you brought up something, and I do recall working on this as part of the program too, but personal board of directors. And I want to talk about the importance of that, because I do believe there's so much value in who you surround yourself with. There's value in the community that you form around you. So how did you go about selecting those people, and what sort of purpose do they serve in helping you get to where you want to be?
Yeah. They are incredibly important. When I first looked at who I spent the most time with, or who I looked at as for advice and mentors, it was one of those things where I had to suspend for a moment that feeling of like, well, I don't want to be manipulative, or I don't want to just look at this person for what they can do, like in using manipulative in the negative side of it, as opposed to manipulative like physical therapy, right? We don't apply that same, if I'm going to manipulate your arm, we don't apply that same negativity. And so if to look at manipulative in like a neutral way, it's like, oh, okay, yes, there are gifts and talents and access and resources that person X, Y, and Z do bring. And I really do want more of that. And so it was not only was it active, you're moving pieces along based off of where you're at. It's being able to, I think one thing that was really clear when I did start to know, okay, I'm entering into this particular phase, here is who needs to come up to that inner circle because they're going to challenge me in a way that I haven't been challenged in other ways. This person is kind of a softer place and I'm warm and fuzzy, but this person can give me they shoot it to me straight, but I also know that it's coming from this really place of I want to help you. And so as I go through different life phases, that gets to move up and around, and people will still remain in that personal like team, but sometimes in terms of that inner circle, that changes. And I guess I would wonder, perhaps it has to do too with me learning and knowing myself more to then trust who actually can, who I can feel comfortable being vulnerable with, that I can pay attention to like, yeah, no, I see why people kind of grate against that person's advice, but honestly, there's other data about like, you know, how they treat their subordinates, how they treat, you know, like when nobody's looking, you know, it's, I'll tell a story real quick about, I remember seeing, this is a couple of weeks ago at a party, and I remember seeing a moment where a gentleman was like, oh, who wants cake? Who wants cupcakes? And so he's going to go and grab for whatever people want from the table. And so he comes back and he's got majority cupcakes and one slice of cake. And I initially had said cupcake, but I saw the slice of cake and I was like, oh, I kind of want the slice of cake. Without hesitation, with no like, there was nothing. He was like, here, take this one. And then he didn't even go back and get himself another slice of cake. He was just going to be content with the cupcake. This is all data that's like, not only did I feel comfortable that that's going to be a good person for my friends network, but those are the kind of things that if I was looking for a personal board of director member who was in radio, that I might pick up the phone and ask to get his intake on stuff, because there's this genuine quality about him giving in a way that data gave me. And so I would say, you know, it's a journey to learn how to pick them, but when you pick them, I think it really comes down to where you actually are inside.
Yeah. Oh, I love that story. That's such a great anecdote. And I think that speaks to identifying people with different strengths than you, right? And then once you understand what their strengths are, you consult them for various aspects of your life and the decisions that you make. I personally do recommend that people put together a personal board of directors. It doesn't need to be anything like, here's who they are, or you don't need to publicize it anyway. It's just for yourself, right? For your own sake. The way I look at everything is that I am a brand in of it myself, right? And I'm the CEO of my life. And so CEOs have a board of directors, people that are holding them accountable, people that serve as a sounding board, people that you can turn to and consult and just get some advice from. And I have that community that I turn to at every point and turn of my life. Even in starting the Quo, I talk to quite a few people who are considered as part of my quote unquote personal board of directors. I consult them when I make big career moves. I even consult them on personal matters. But there's just so much benefit to having that network put together. And you're right, the first time I even thought of it that way was through our MSc program at Northwestern.
Yeah. And I'm excited to see, I'll read certain articles where I'm like, oh my God, that's a personal board of directors. I was on a call with one of an organization that I really enjoy their work in the equity and equality space, and they were interviewing April Ryan, the White House correspondent. And they started. Oh my God, it was so good. Like, she was actually on vacation, so it just brought this kind of sense of like, oh, we're just hanging out with April on the call in the middle of a noontime. And what they referenced was a kitchen cabinet. Like, there's where you got like these, you've got your salt, you've got your pepper, you've got your seasoning salt, you have those core seasonings that you just know you need. You don't need all of the different fancy ones that you can get at boutiques. You just need those real salt of the earth, easy to, you know, get kind of people. And I was like, that's that same concept. So people are hearing this and are like being able to see how much sense that makes for them, and then putting it in terms that make sense to them. And I think those are things like you need to have these coaches. And I love something you brought up. These people sometimes don't even need to know that that's what they are to you. My best mentors have been people who had no idea, which is actually kind of interesting too, because I'm naturally an observer. I to ground it, I'm like a near textbook INFJ if in terms of Myers-Briggs, and in Enneagram, I'm like a 3-wing 2 and 4. So I have this interesting like blend. But in just observing those subtle nuances when people are just out living their lives, being themselves, that they're not thinking that they're being watched, it's almost kind of like I'm taking mental field notes. It's like field notes. Subject, when faced with an opportunity to be accountable for a mistake, they owned it. They didn't throw anybody else under the bus. Or subject, ooh, they did throw this person under the bus. Yet, the next time they didn't, or, and so it's kind of like interesting. Then I'm like, okay, so, and was that like somebody who was under them, or was there somebody that was above them? Oh, the time that they didn't throw someone under the bus when it was somebody above them. This is all data. And it's almost like, for me, it's like, I then reverse engineer, and it's like, I can see, I have empathy. It's like, okay, that didn't feel good to watch, and I feel pained at that. Okay, that's on their journey, or that's there with their. How can I use this as a cautionary tale so that if I'm faced with a similar situation, that I handle it in a way that I can go to sleep at night. And so it's like, oh, okay, well, for me, regardless of where somebody falls on that hierarchical scale, I can always be accountable, even if it hurts, because that is still less painful than what it feels like to watch somebody be offered up as a sacrificial lamb. So it's little things like that, everything can become an allegory. Even our movies and our books and the sitcoms we watch, like, these are all ways that we can like, if I was getting my nails done. So if I were actually Carrie, now I would do this, or, yep, I relate. I have been in my Carrie phase. Yes. So I think there's something helpful about being able to just observe and then be able to choose people based off of what you get to see them do, and then make better choices or different choices for yourself.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's so much that you said there that we could unpack for days, and I could talk to you about this forever. But one thing I will say is that I do like that you called out the fact that mentorship doesn't need to be the structured thing, right? You can identify people that you turn to and use as a sounding board. And so I feel like everyone has this like preconceived notion, and then it becomes so formal to the point where you're like, okay, I have to identify a time to talk to this person. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be really organic in that sense. And then the second thing that you said that really struck a chord with me was the type of media we're consuming. It all impacts the way that we show up in the world, right? Like what we're listening to, what we're watching. And so being super intentional about that also goes a really, really long way. Now, that said, I want to pivot our conversation a little bit, because I want to get to something really important, and I think that's going to be really valuable for our viewers and listeners to hear, and hopefully will spark a little bit of dialogue. But I want to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. It's a hot button topic, and it's accelerated over the last couple of years, especially in 2020, with heightened levels of various situations coming into play, right? We had a very eventful year in 2020, and in addition to the pandemic, a lot of racial tension and a lot of women-oriented issues also coming to the forefront. A lot of these disparities have existed for a really long time, but there's a special level of light that's being shed on all of this now. And I think people are in this like really unique and funky place for how do we navigate this? Because we've never navigated all of this all at once. It's been ongoing, but there's this turn of events that's happening, if you will. I think more and more brands and companies are engaging in this topic. But that said, I don't think they all do it in a very effective way. And so, one, I want to talk to you about what DEI means to you, diversity, equity, inclusion. And let's start there, and then I want to work through what it needs to turn into for tangible steps.
Yeah, simply put, to me, it's being able to embrace the other person's humanity. It is no different than mine, no different than yours. It's no different. If I see you as human, I am coming to the table knowing that you are going to have triumphs and failures and love and sadness, and like at the heart of it, all that you want is to feel and be safe and in comfort and without worry or fear or having to fight so hard to be seen as an equal, as a human being. So I start there, and then we can layer on all of the different intersections in which we live at. So it's like, yes, at the heart, I am a woman. Then I am Black. Then I am, I'm a Star Trekkie, the original series, nothing else. And then I'm, into fashion and pearls. And then I'm like, and we can just layer all of those on. But first, if you can see me as human, you won't have an issue when you see all these other different facets of my personality.
Yeah, no, I'm completely aligned with that. I do think that it starts with, this is who I am, and feeling heard, feeling seen, feeling represented, right? That's such a big part of this. Feeling represented, we were talking about being mindful of the type of media we're consuming. So if so many of us are looking at that, then we also have to challenge, is it being fully representative of who is consuming it as well?
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be one subgroup. It's got to be, reflective of all of us. Maybe not all at once. We can't do that, right? It's not going to always happen all at once, but is it happening, throughout enough that people can see themselves in those shoes or on that screen?
Absolutely. Or yeah, like in referencing in that Sex and the City Carrie reference, like, yes, I was a product of that time period, and therefore that was what was available for me to consume. And so the burden, if you will, for people who don't look like the 4 characters that are portrayed on the screen is the way that we connected was through the story. We connected through the humanity. And what I feel like with DEI, it's hard to help somebody connect through a story if the lenses through how they're seeing you is warped. So it's almost like helping. I feel like it's inner work. A lot of this could be inner work. We got to read a lot of case studies where DEI just does not work if you're going to bring somebody into a room and then tell them, here are all the ways in which you now need to act and use and do. Fully. It is helpful in helping people know and give them a primer. But in terms of when certain people leave that room, they may feel that element of like resistance to it. And so I think there's this element of like what we had to go through. The first out the gate was sitting across from somebody, not even having had any type of introduction in our MSc HLP introduction, and having to see the human. And then when we did encounter the various lenses in which they lived their life, we could always reconnect back to the human. We are all here to get educated. I did learn about this particular background, and so I can always connect that, like, at the heart, interperson's name is really the kid who always wanted to be a firefighter. And so she's gonna have that like ability on a team to be like, where's the problem, right? And so it's like, how do we help people kind of do the internal stuff to feel comfortable in their own skin as worthy, to see then other people as humans and worthy, and then they can integrate some of those, like, okay, so now here's what you need to do. We need to enter spaces with intentionality and an eye for inclusion, and how you can do little things to make other people feel, like you said, worthy and valued.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm so glad you brought up the exercise we did in class, and I want to tell everybody what that exercise was like. I was probably the most vulnerable I had ever been in that situation. So, one, shout out to Dr. Susan Carver, because she led that course, yes, at Northwestern University on cultural intelligence. And so this was day one, and I don't know if this was day one for you, but this was day one for our program. We were brought into the class, and I remember right off the bat thinking that we were just diving right into the overview of the program content and what the expectations were. But I was like, wait, where's the introduction? Because usually, you go around and introduce yourselves, you do some sort of an icebreaker. And I'm like, is this just what grad school is like, that we don't even get to know one another? Little did I know that when we went to this workshop with Dr. Carver, she had a reason behind that. She didn't want us to introduce ourselves to one another. She wanted us to strip down truly and sit across from a complete stranger. And this is what happened. So she assigned us to a partner, and then you sit across from this person. You don't know a thing about them. You don't even know their name yet. And she provided this sheet of paper with all these like questions, and they were some very hypersensitive questions. It was like, what ethnic background do you think this person belongs to? What is their socioeconomic background? How much money do you think they make? How much money do you think their parents made? Where do you think they grew up? What is their career choice? And it was so eye-opening, because it really challenged our unconscious bias, right? So I sat across from my classmate, Ivan, who is a Mexican American, right? And I could tell that he's Latino, but I didn't want to make a ton of assumptions around it. But based on what the world has taught me, of course, the stereotypes came into my mind. And so I really had to challenge that afterwards. And that was the whole point of that session, that we have these preconceived ideas of who people are by outward appearance. And then I felt so vulnerable answering these questions, because I was like, I don't want to make these assumptions about him. But there is an unconscious layer that probably comes into play. And so this is where the work comes in. So what do you think is the work that people need to do? You talked about inner work. What does that look like? What is inner work?
Yeah, it is. I could use my own personal life. It's on a personal note, right? And so in my personal life, it has been sitting with the discomfort. It has been of things about myself, of truths about myself, sitting in the discomfort of I'm vulnerable. And that can be like, okay, well, how do I couch this idea so that people accept it? And realizing that maybe they didn't really hear it because I was giving them so much, and that's coming from a place of having to prove myself. And it wasn't until this is maybe 2 years ago where a friend of mine was like, no, you don't have to that's indicative of your internal feelings of self-worth. If you're having to feel like here's everything, like there's other people who have been able to grow in their lives that can just be like, this is what I do right now. And people will ask them for more, or they'll give up more as time goes on. And so it's tiny things like that. It's trusting myself. Like it was, relationship centered, where it was like, okay, I pick amazing female friends and relationships that fulfill me and sustain me. I must have a bad picker. What's wrong with me when it comes to my romantic relationships with men, right? And it was being like, okay, so the data is telling me that I can pick amazing female friendships and I can pick awesome male mentors and friends. So what is it that, how am I approaching romantic relationships with men differently? And like, this wasn't like, oh, okay, I thought about it and 5 seconds later, here I am in this place of centeredness. No, it was, it was years of work, but it was also incrementally trying different things that were low risk. So it is being like, okay, what makes me feel like I can be vulnerable with friends? And it's like, oh, they're vulnerable too. Okay. So next time I'm engaging over a dinner, and it's like, yeah, when, you know, I was 5, I was really, really afraid of ET. Like, what movie really scared you? And ultimately, like, if they're willing to go there with you, you're going to get some details as to how vulnerable they are. And it's not so much that it's this actual test. It's just that, like, I'm giving something that is a little tender for me because I'm, you know, you can laugh at me or you can be like, oh my gosh, ET was the cutest, you're dumb. And that's also data response too, right? And so, you know, people who get in the category of friends is like, oh my God, that's so interesting. Okay, I'm going to tell you this. I was afraid of Snoopy, right? And then you're like, wait, what? You know, my brother caught my ring, but I just share all of that to be like, it really all starts here. And then your outer world does begin to change because you are going to start making different choices. And when you called out Rockstar's Garage, there is I think it's called like an autobiography in 4 parts, and it's hanging in a frame in the restroom. And I finished washing my hands when we were at the site visit, and like I'm reading this, and I was like, oh my God, it's so good, because ultimately it's seeing, you know, walking down the street, seeing a hole, falling in it. Okay, part 2, walking down the street, seeing a hole, falling in it, but getting out faster than you did the last time. Walking down the street, seeing a hole, falling in it, and even faster getting out. And then the last one is like walking down the street, see a hole, and I go around it, right? And so it's a lot that's how these interchanges work. It's going to be a process, but cumulatively you'll find yourself in a point where you look back and you're like, wow, I did that. And my relationships and my work life and everything is so different, all in how I did the work on myself. And so I think that's one of the things that is so inspiring to me also about you specifically touching into the change makers and disruptors and challengers, is that like automatically I know I'm going to be dealing with people who have done that tough inner work.
Yeah, and it is tough inner work. You got to really challenge the first thoughts that come to your mind when you hear about somebody, you see someone for the first time. And I also think that this is where brands often go wrong, because putting out a statement is simply not enough. The work has to really start on the inside of a company, a brand, or an organization, and then it reflects and trickles outward. And then you can really make meaningful change in the world, right? Like this is when it really does start within. It starts within us as individuals, it starts within as a company culture, and then you can bring about the change externally as a society, as a community, because we've all done the work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love how you did bring that back into that corporate world, because ultimately the unhappiest person who is experiencing all of these different pain points at work is ultimately a reflection of the top leadership. At some point, there is something that person in the top leadership is experiencing pain points. Now, whether or not you see it because they're in this office, or they're hardly there, or they wear these clothes, or they're at this such a socioeconomic status, there is something that is mirroring that at the lower end. And then conversely, the, people who are like at companies predominantly that are predominantly in living out and have integrated these principles and has done the work at the higher leadership level, you're going to hear much more about, I feel empowered, I feel autonomous, I feel valued, I feel worthy. And that is also indicative of the person at the top leader and what's happening in their inner self too. So it really is, all of it's kind of mirroring back to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Once again, it's all connectivity, like we pointed out earlier. So one last question I want to ask you is, we have been talking a lot about this diversity, equity, inclusion work, and like I mentioned at the top of the show, that there's been a lot of changes in the last year or so. A lot more has been coming to the forefront. So, in your opinion, how can the non-Black community or non-BIPOC community, the non-women community, be better allies? How can they show up and really contribute to changing that narrative and challenging the status quo?
Yeah. A lot of it is what we talked about earlier, in sitting with the discomfort. But I think being able to observe in a lot of different ways the kind of same symptoms just played out in different specific individuals, is that I think not only are you faced with this discomfort, but then it's this overwhelming amount of work, if you look at it from this huge global macro perspective, that just feels like this huge tidal wave. And the mental picture I'm having is like the movie Deep Impact, where you're sitting on the beach and there's this huge tsunami coming at you. And I think, and what I encourage is, you don't have to jump in and try to tackle that tsunami, because that's impossible. Because if it was, then BIPOC community would have solved it already, right? So really, it's those small incremental things. If it's as minute as, I am faced with the fact that my immediate idea of this person who's standing in this grocery line, I have actually just built a story and made an assumption about how much money they make, what kind of car they drive, those questions that we had to make assumptions about, where I think they grew up. I've made a lot of assumptions. So let me recognize this person as a human being. And in this moment, how can I treat them in a way that makes them feel seen and valued as a human being? And it's interesting, I've done some research with, health disparities and health practitioners. And ultimately, that patient experience keeps coming back to, can you just treat me like, as opposed to you just being doctor patient, can you treat me like your family member, like a human being? And so even if and it may not happen where you're standing in that grocery line for 10 minutes, even just giving yourself the space to feel it for a minute. And then next time you have the opportunity, feel it for 2 minutes, and then feel it for 3 minutes, and then do it with more people across the day, and then do it with your employees, and then do it and then ultimately you're going to find incrementally, you're going to wake up one day and find yourself, standing up in front of, your boss and being like, you know what, and fighting and being a sponsor for somebody who's not even in the room, because you feel their experience. They are you, and you were doing something for somebody who is just as valued and just as seen as you were able to be, and you've seen those moments, and you're like, I refuse. But that's because you've built a little bit of a protective armor, because you've been practicing all of this time to take the risk to fight for others, in just how you see yourself, or in just how you, no, I'm going to correct grandma here, or I'm going to tell my uncle, that really hurts me to hear you say that.
I love that you put it that way. Yeah.
Sometimes, we have to go into because they are equal. No, it just really hurts me to hear you say that.
Wow.
It doesn't even have a conversation at the dinner table. It just really hurts me to hear you say it.
Yeah. And I think it triggers empathy. Yeah. It triggers empathy when you say that, this is how it's making me feel like this. Mm-hmm. So I do think that's a great way to challenge someone's perspective without, causing such a stir up, because it can be a very sensitive topic. I think a lot of people start to clash when it comes across like, you are this and you're to that. And so I love that you put it that way specifically.
Yeah. And the burden isn't on let me go to Payal and see if she'll give me a list of all the right things to do, because ultimately, if you go do the list of, in quotations, all the right things to do, you are going to mess up every time, because you're not doing that inner work. It's not coming from this place of intentionality and inner change. So yeah, it really starts here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you addressed that, because yes, I do believe that the work has to be on us, rather than asking somebody, right? That was a hot topic last year as well. Like, who's supposed to do the educating in this scenario? And so I'm so glad that you did bring this up. I could talk to you about this forever. And we even had a long car ride in one of our road trips and drives back home. So I feel like we could go on and on forever. This may have to be a to be continued conversation. In the meantime, how can people find you on the interwebs if they want to connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. You can find me at www.onapersonalnote.com. I'm on Instagram at @onapersonalnote_IG. And then obviously we're around town, UN Women Chicago. I'm Chicago International Film Fest, like Chicago Council Global. Like we're in a lot of stuff. So yes. If people aren't sensing a theme already, my guests tend to do a lot. They're very busy people. And so your time is incredibly valuable. I hope you know that. And I so appreciate you being here, and thank you for sharing your message, being vulnerable with the Quo community. It warms my heart to hear you doing well and launching your brand and kicking off something really exciting. And I just want to thank you for being a bright light in my life, Tony. Those of us who get to feel your shine are just so incredibly lucky. And so folks who are listening and tuning in, please do find her, follow her. She's truly a really bright light, and I'm just so lucky. So thank you. And thank you. And I actually am just a reflection of you. We couldn't be friends if we didn't have similar qualities. And so I feel the same way, my friend. And yeah, I can't wait to come back next year and be able to see where you've come with this amazing community that not only are you building, but you're giving people tangible action items, and that this work of challenging and disrupting and change making, you're going to make it an easy, accessible way for everybody to get there, in however that looks for them. And so you're best poised for it, and I'm excited for you.
Oh, thank you. That means so much coming from you. I really appreciate it. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. That's all for this episode. Please tune into the next one. We're going to bring on just as powerful, impactful guests each episode. And so truly appreciate you being here. Take care. Hey, it's me again. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, and I really hope you did, please subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming service so that you're notified when new episodes are posted. Also, be sure to follow The Quo on social media at The Quo Media across all platforms for the latest and greatest. Thanks again for joining, supporting, and uplifting the Quo community, or as I like to call it, our Quohort. Catch you next time.